Now, one of the most important and popular features of any smartphone, the one that I get asked about the most, has to be, of course, the camera tech. People take shots of absolutely bloody everything these days using their smartphones. From whatever they're about to stuff inside of their face hole to those small wrinkly human beings that sometimes live in the same house as them. But don't reckon that you have to spunk out wads of cash on an iPhone or Galaxy to be able to take good looking snaps and shoot slick looking 4K home movies, because lots of budget friendly smartphones costing as little as 200 quid can definitely do the job for you. Now, I've tested and reviewed loads of affordable mobiles of late, and here's my pick of the very best budget camera phones that you could pick as we begrudgingly stroll away into 2020. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So first up, if your budget can stretch as high as £400, and I know that's at the upper limit, then I definitely highly recommend the excellent Pixel 3a. Now, when Google first pulled back the curtain on its wallet-friendly Pixel 3a smartphones, I was a wee bit concerned to hear that Pixel visual core had been stripped out in order to save on costs. So the question is, are these affordable smartphones still able to capture great looking photos and video? Well, thankfully the answer is a bloody massive whopping yep. The Pixel 3a's camera smarts are right up there with the flagship Pixel mobiles despite the lower asking price and the lack of that core. Processing isn't as quick, yet the results are stunning, with HDR, night and portrait photos in particular really impressing. In fact, those fresh HDR smarts from the flagship Pixel 4 phone have now come to the 3a in an update, so you can capture a bright image of your subject even when shooting against a well-lit backdrop. You get all of the great camera features that you would expect, including that excellent night sight mode and the ability to shoot accurate portrait photos despite the lack of a depth sensor. My test video also came out pretty well, serving up smooth image stabilization and natural reproduction even at 4K level. Once again, Google has proven to us that the software can be just as important as the lenses and the sensor, and so the Pixel 3a and the Pixel 3a confidently stroll into my list of the best camera phones of 2020 if your budget is a bit limited. Now, 400 quid is still fairly extravagant, so if your budget is a lot more strict than that, well, why not check out Motorola's Moto G8 Plus, which popped out of the arse end of 2019 with a much more affordable £230 price tag. This is a brilliant point and shoot snapper for the price. Photos are captured at a 12 megapixel resolution despite the 48 megapixel primary lens, and that's because it uses the pixel binning tech. Your results are still perfectly detailed, while combining the information from 4 pixels into one means that you get bright results almost all of the time, even when you're snapping away indoors. Colours appear perfectly natural, with vibrant subjects really shining, and even in HDR situations, the Moto G8 Plus does a bang-up job, while the dedicated night mode is ideal for those really low light pics. You've also got quite a few bonus modes and features to piddle about with, including an excellent portrait mode which adds some snazzy bokeh effects to your snaps, and the cool action cam mode which first appeared in Motorola's One Action smartphone. And this can capture up to Full HD resolution video in landscape mode with a wide angle view, even when the phone is being held vertically, complete with some very respectable image stabilization. Now, Chinese manufacturer Oppo is another one who's impressed us recently with its fantastic affordable smartphone. So for instance, first of all, we were treated to the excellent Oppo Reno 2Z, which serves up some incredible specs and a respectable quad lens rear camera for just 329 quid. And then shortly after that, Oppo launched the seriously affordable handset, the Oppo A9 2020, which costs just 220 quid and yet still boasts a quad lens setup. You've got a 48 megapixel primary lens, all the rage these days of course, backed by an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter and a pair of 2 megapixel snappers to help out with portrait shots. That setup is pretty similar to the Reno 2Z. You can quickly jump between the primary and the ultra wide angle lenses with just a quick tap to shoot a very different viewpoint, and I love having that flexible setup at this price. Oppo's focus also gets a big thumbs up. It's quick and effective across the full range, even producing pleasingly crisp macro shots. Everyday photos do occasionally look a little washed out when the lighting is strong, which can take away from the general texture and also saturate those colours a bit. But that said, you can really bump up the vibrancy with the dazzle colour feature, which certainly makes things look pretty, albeit in a very artificial manner. Overall, the A9 2020 is perfectly acceptable for your everyday photos. I prefer the overall results produced by the Moto G8 Plus, but this thing definitely ain't bad. And you also have a handful of bonus modes to play with, including a reasonably good portrait mode. This doesn't falter very often, with pretty clean edge detection for a budget blower. And the night mode definitely helps to turn ugly low light shots into brighter, more balanced affairs, as good as you'll get from any Honor phone. For your home movies, you get full 4K video action, although there's no 60 frames per second support, even when you drop down to Full HD. Detail is pretty sharp at that max Ultra HD setting, although colours are unnaturally boosted, which is pretty common on lesser devices. Definitely don't bother filming at night, as the results are generally pants, and you will want to stand quite still when you're recording too. The image stabilization ain't great at Full HD resolution, and you'll be bringing up your lunch if you shot at 4K. Flip to the front and you've got a 16 megapixel selfie shooter which just about copes with HDR shots, although you will get some oversaturation in the background. Just don't bother with that portrait mode as the edge detection is laughably bad, and the camera also sucks hard at nighttime even with that flash mode active. You'll just end up basically looking like a bewildered ghoul. Now rather perversely these days, it seems like the less money you spend on your smartphone, the more camera lenses you actually get slapped on the back of your handset. Take the £200 Realme 5 phone for instance, which has 4 of the buggers slapped on that rear end. That 12 megapixel primary shooter is joined by an 8 megapixel wide angle snapper, plus a 2 megapixel macro lens and 2 megapixel depth sensor. Of course, more lenses definitely does not necessarily translate into better photos and videos, although the Realme 5 does a pretty bang up job despite having a few little issues here and there. Everyday shots taken out in daylight are reasonably sharp, but as soon as you move inside, things generally get quite soft and fuzzy. Low light is particularly troublesome, although the night mode does at least come in handy here, making things a wee bit sharper and brighter, although the processing time is long. And while you can digitally zoom in at any point to get a closer view of your subject, your final pic will be severely lacking in detail once you do so. I also found that this phone loved taking extra shots unexpectedly, hence I have a lot of test photos of my feet or the wall as seen from a particularly strange sloping angle. Still, all that said, the Realme 5 is no more limited than other sub £200 smartphones, and the likes of the portrait mode and the macro mode actually work pretty well for a budget blower thanks to those dedicated bonus lenses. And no complaints with that wide angle lens either. It's quite the rarity on cheapy handsets, and it definitely offers a very different view of the action when needed. If you want to swap around to that 13 megapixel selfie camera, you can generally capture decent looking shots of your mug, as long as you're not snapping against a super bright background. And as for video, you can also capture up to 4K resolution footage, and the Realme 5 is pretty good for simple home movies, capturing plenty of detail at that Ultra HD level, as well as the surrounding audio in a crisp and clear fashion. And if you've got a wee bit of extra cash to spare, you could always upgrade to the Realme 5 Pro, which boosts that primary lens to a 48 megapixel effort, and like the Moto G8 Plus, this then indulges in a bit of 4-in-1 pixel binning, so you can expect slightly brighter results with less noise in those low light conditions. And speaking of which, fellow Chinese smartphone manufacturer Xiaomi is never one to be beaten on price, of course. For under £200 you can pick up the Redmi Note 8T, which packs a similar camera setup to that Realme 5 Pro. You get a 48 megapixel primary lens, plus an ultra wide angle lens, a macro sensor and a depth sensor too. Now for a sub £200 mobile, this camera produces some perfectly respectable results. On full auto mode you have a scene recognition tool that can tweak the settings and boost colours for certain subjects, such as this lovely bit of plant life. And even with this knocked off, you can expect respectable detail in your snaps. A bit of pixel binning action helps to brighten up your shots, although I did notice that some of my pics were a little bit on the warm side, nothing too severe though. And if you're shooting a high contrast scene, the Redmi Note 8T's HDR chops do a pretty decent job. Those bright skies aren't too badly saturated at all, and you'll still capture a reasonable amount of detail. You can quickly swap to the ultra wide angle lens with a single tap, and again I can't really moan about the results at all, especially as this feature is pretty bloody rare at this price point. There's not too much distortion, and the likes of the colour temperature are mostly unaffected. Less impressive is the macro lens, which kind of works at close distance but unfortunately captures quite drab looking photos. Of the bonus camera features, that night mode is definitely well worth a look. Low light shots in auto mode look distinctly fuzzy with plenty of murk and oversaturation around those lighter spots, but the fast acting night mode takes a sledgehammer to these problems, giving you a sharp, more balanced photo that's certainly a lot more attractive, all with minimal effort on your part. And as for the video side of things, I definitely recommend bumping up to 4K resolution if you've got the storage space to handle it. This captures quite strong detail with warm colours again, although that's typical for most smartphones shooting at Ultra HD resolution. Audio pickup is fine from all directions, although that surrounding noise and wind effects are definitely captured in full force, again pretty standard for a budget blower. And the stabilisation leaves a lot to be desired, so you'll want to stand as still as possible. Plus, if you want to sacrifice detail for fluidity, you can also shoot footage at Full HD resolution at 60 FPS with reasonable results. So that's my personal pick of the very best budget-friendly smartphone cameras that you can buy as we head into 2020. Now, I've personally tested and reviewed all of those smartphones that I mentioned. You go check out my in-depth reviews of them all right now here on TechSpert. There are a few other budget-friendly camera phones that I haven't had a chance to review, unfortunately, such as, for instance, the Samsung Galaxy A40, supposed to serve up a pretty respectable dual-lens rear camera for around that £150 to £200 price point. So as I say, I haven't personally tested it, so I can't personally vouch for it, but there are other alternatives out there as well. And of course, if you've been using a wallet-friendly blower that has a smart camera on it, definitely let us know in the comments down below. It'd be great to hear your own personal recommendations. Please do ding that bell and hit subscribe and all that other stuff that YouTube people bang on about all the time. And have yourselves a lovely week, people. Cheers!